Is Nebraska's new special teams coordinator blowing smoke about how good of a leader Matt Rhule is? How could he know? We'll discuss it next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts in on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in this episode.
All right. Excited about that. Welcome in. Thursday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone is with me. He's got his coffee. We're digging out from the blizzard of early March 2025. Full speed ahead into the spring, if not summer, by early next week. There's going to be college baseball played this weekend, I can safely say, here in the state of Nebraska. Probably at 3 venues at the Division I level, at least. We'll talk a little baseball today later in the show, but right now we cannot yet move away from Mike Ekeler. Mike Ekeler has been the man of the week this week at Nebraska with Nebraska football. And he said something, Connor, on Tuesday about Matt Rhule that I found interesting, knowing that Mike Ekeler has only been around Matt Rhule for 2 or 3 weeks. And I wondered, what reason does Mike Ekeler have to say this about Matt Rhule unless he truly feels this way about Matt Rhule? The new special teams coordinator for Nebraska is at his 12th coaching stop since 2003. By his own description, he's been everywhere, man. So what reason does he have to blow smoke about this coach, Matt Rhule, who's won 1 conference title in his time as a college head coach and even just sniffed the college football playoff even once? Mike Ekeler coached in the college football playoff this year. Anyway, we'll react to it. We'll answer that question after we hear the clip. Here it is right here.
But this man may be the best leader I've ever been around. I mean, I sit there in his meetings and I'm taking notes left and right. He's incredible. I mean, the University of Nebraska, the people of Nebraska, I hope you understand how blessed you are to have such a tremendous, tremendous coach and a great leader. And he's one of the only guys that probably in the game. Think about his path. Think about started off coaching D-line. Then he went linebackers, special teams coordinator. Then he makes, a logical progression. He's a defensive coordinator. Another logical progression, he's a quarterback's coach. Then he's offensive line coach for the Giants when they won the Super Bowl. Then, who does that? The man can coach. He's so highly intelligent. He can coach every position on the field. And he knows it. And what he's done, in my opinion, is he's hired a bunch of great teachers.
That's a key part there at the end, right? Yeah, who does that? Well, I mean, a lot of people have won a lot of things. I think Mike Ekeler is probably falling into the same thing that we did when Matt Rhule got here. Like, the dude is really good at giving speeches and firing people up and saying things. Like, there's no doubt about it. I'm not discrediting Matt Rhule as a leader. I think what you're seeing right now is, big picture, Matt Rhule, like, finally getting into an area or being in an area of college football where I think it's really comfortable for him. You heard Ekeler there say, he's hired a bunch of good assistants and I think he's got a pretty good staff this year, and Rhule gets to kind of move around and be the CEO. And I think that's a really good fit for him based on what I've seen so far. But it's not surprising to me to hear a coach come in and be like, man, this guy really seems like he's got it all figured out. Well, that might not be completely the case. He definitely projects that way. That's for sure.
I'm surprised that there hasn't been some kind of a media outlet or one of these off-season projects that we do with The Athletic or that's done at ESPN or SI, or heck, that's been done on the Locked On network, where you construct the perfect college football coach and you get to take pieces of a certain coach with certain things that they do and build it into like one robot coach. So you can take like Lincoln Riley's, game offensive game planning. You can take somebody's game management. You can take somebody's game planning. Matt Rhule would be the guy when you were putting together the perfect college football coach. You would take Matt Rhule's
press conferences.
Press conferences. Would he be a candidate for that? You would get like his meeting room persona, I think, like when he's talking to the team. I think this time of year, like what Matt Rhule does with his coaches and his roster in the springtime, he's talked about how this is his favorite time of the year to be a college football coach. This is like nobody's favorite time of the year to be part of a college football program. It's fine for us, like it's fine for you as a fan, even though the games are pretty far away. But like to be a player or an assistant coach or somebody who's behind the scenes, it's sometimes it can feel like this year you're just grinding with nothing in sight. But Matt Rhule likes that. Matt Rhule likes to grind with nothing in sight. And I think to a guy like Ekeler, that really appeals to him. Like he's a bit wired like that, although he has some other strengths. And to see Matt Rhule in front of his team and having the 6 or 7 hour meeting that Phil Snow talked about last week, that makes an impression on Mike Ekeler. So no, I don't think he's blowing smoke. I think everything that he's seen from Matt Rhule leads him to believe that, man, this guy, like, how come he's not won 5 national championships at this point? Eckler's probably wondering that.
I think I think Rhule is a motivator, and him and Ekeler really see eye to eye, obviously, on that piece of it. And motivators tend to be, motivated. They can be motivated. So I think that, like I said, that's not a surprise. I also think, they're, one of the things that you could see pretty much right away, one of the things that we saw when Matt Rhule got here was his ability to organize, to put people in the correct positions or put them in positions. And then, that manifests itself in a recruiting standpoint, where you go after in the transfer portal, how you organize your staff, who talks, who the voices are. Like he has always done a really good job, I think, of manipulating and maneuvering the small picture, the day-to-day, while also keeping the big picture in mind and what they sort of want to be. And I know that's really broad and generic, but I do think Matt Rhule is really good at that. I think he has a really good understanding of all that stuff.
To me, that makes Rhule and Ekeler a really interesting combo. And I realize these are not like the two guys who are running the team. Like if you're talking about two guys running the team, I suppose you'd say Rhule and Pat Stewart at this point, or you'd say that's the new general manager. We're still getting used to that name. Or you'd say Rhule and Dana Holgorsen, or maybe Rhule and Phil Snow. So Ekeler, he's part of that like leadership hierarchy. But I think the two of them are a really interesting combination, and they came together. Like this marriage happened because there were some mutual connections, and Ekeler, of course, was in a situation where his contract was up for renewal at Tennessee, and he has parents that he wanted to be close to. Like it all just kind of came together perfectly. Like another time, another month, another year, like Matt Rhule and Mike Ekeler probably never get together, but they do in this situation. And I find it to be intriguing because, like, how is this dynamic going to play off each other? Like Ekeler has always in his career been the guy, or at least in the late, like since maybe the last 8 to 10 years, when he had some experience, he's been the guy who brings the juice, who brings the energy. Mm-hmm. And I think like he filled that role on a lot of teams, even if he was coaching with strong personalities, the head coach. I mean, Josh Heupel's a strong personality. He doesn't bring the juice in the same way that you get from Matt Rhule, like at least not in the times that I've been around Josh Heupel. Like great coach, but He's not doing some of the stuff that Matt Rhule does in front of the team or in the locker room, at least as far as I can tell. And that's where I think Ekeler can be a real benefit to these programs that he's been a part of and has been a benefit. Yeah. And so now you got Rhule, like Eckler's kind of standing there, I think, in awe. He's like, wow, this guy's got like as much energy in this moment as I do. So when they get into a season, when they get into August and they're in training camp or even in spring this month, I'm curious to see like how they bounce things off each other.
And credit Rhule because I guess he kind of had to, but he surrounded himself with, with these kind of people who could really, I think, see the vision, but you also have to trust them, right? You have to trust, like if you're Matt Rhule, you have to, you're kind of giving the keys to Dana Holgorsen and just letting them go. And it's the same thing with Mike Ekeler. So you have to, even though you're new in the relationships with these guys, you have to empower them to lead their positions and their units however they see fit too.
And I don't know about you, but I get no sense, like when Scott Frost had to hand over the keys to the Nebraska offense in 2022, so reluctant to do it. Like you can see it in his body language and the words that he spoke. Just he was forced to do it, didn't want to do it. And whether you believe Rhule had to do it, like if he had a choice, I think he had a choice, but he made the choice himself to bring in strong leaders around this team. If it's Holgorsen, Snow, Ekeler, we'll see. I think there are some others who will emerge. He doesn't seem at all to be doing this reluctantly. Like he's going into this, and I think he's excited about like how the head coach, about how his role can shift and change, and he can evolve in this new reality of Nebraska football in 2025.
Yeah, that's just his attitude. That's his approach, and that definitely makes him that's a good quality of a really good leader. That's for sure. All right, more to discuss on the subject of Nebraska football after this here on a Thursday edition of the Locked On Nebraska podcast.
Okay, new sponsor for you on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Nissan, the Armada Team of the Week, is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart each week for, I guess, the rest of the season. It is March already, but we're getting into this from top seeded stars to unexpected upsets. These guys, they showcase the strength and the sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut team of the week are the Houston Cougars.
They're good.
Since joining the Big 12 last season, the Cougs have gone a combined 33-4 in league games. They won the regular season title by multiple games both years. It's clear that our team of the week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can get in the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com.
I tell you what, Mitch, if I was a college basketball team, I would not want to run into the Houston Cougars in the first couple rounds of the NCAA tournament. Just like if I was a road, I wouldn't want to run into the Nissan Armada. Get torn up.
Yeah, March Madness is here. The conference tournaments are getting started. I think we should officially adopt because it's miserable at times, as we've discussed often on this podcast, to dive into Nebraska men's basketball right now. We'll talk about the women here in a few minutes, but I think we should adopt and they start their postseason journey today, the Omaha Mavericks as our team. I mean, we both follow Creighton. We have connections to Creighton. We'll definitely have eyes on the Jays this month, and we'll see what happens with Nebraska. But the Mavs, this is new territory. They're playing Kansas City in the quarterfinal round of the Summit League tournament in is this in Sioux Falls? Is that right?
Falls, South Dakota. That's right. It's gonna be hard to win that thing. But they can.
They have to do it.
They have to do it in order to get to the NCAA tournament. So yeah, I think it's very easy to adopt the Mavs.
We're gonna do it, and if they go to the NCAA tournament and upset a number 1 seed, and we're gonna be sitting here going, we were on them.
We were Mavs guys from the very beginning.
We're doing a whole pod about the Mavs if they beat Auburn in the first round.
I mean, it's Locked On Nebraska, Locked On State of Nebraska, University System of Nebraska.
Whatever we want.
Yeah, we can do it. All right, welcome back, everybody. By the way, Get your questions in for the mailbag show, which is coming up tomorrow, already Thursday this week. So you're running out of time to get in those questions. Have them in by the end of today, or when you listen to this podcast, just start typing up a question and send it over to us, lockedonneb@gmail.com. All right. So a question now that we've heard from all the new coaches as we start to look at Nebraska football's roster and think about all the new pieces on it. They have 7 new coaches, if you count Dana Holgerson on the quote unquote full-time coaching staff. They have a new general manager. They have a bunch of new starters, many of which who have come from the transfer portal. I mean, some of your major players next year in 2025 have come from the transfer portal. 16 transfers in total, 13 freshmen that are working their way into the equation. And you might need as many as you might need double-digit starters if you combine offensive and defensive side of the ball for Nebraska. Where, as we go into spring ball, Mitch, and as we set the table for spring ball, where do you feel like Nebraska needs to make up the most ground, knowing that setup for this group and how important it is for all that to come together?
Well, in all of those places, they have ground to make up. The coaches, I tend to think, are going to make up the ground pretty fast. Some of them have been here. Well, in the case of Holgerson, since November, but we'll exclude him from that analysis. Some of them have been here since the early part of December. Others have been spread around the country and kind of watching Nebraska from a distance. Terry Braden, when he talked on Tuesday, mentioned that, oh yeah, I've been paying attention. Like he had set foot in Nebraska one time. Apparently he didn't come to Nebraska for any kind of an interview or anything like that, because he said it was his first time in the state when he drove up a couple weeks ago. Yeah. So I think those guys are gonna hit the ground running. Like I think that they're all experienced coaches. They've done this. Like they're gonna find a way to not be the squeaky wheel on this Nebraska football operation. I really think it's with Pat Stewart. I think he's got a lot of ground to make up, and I think he's a big piece. And understandably, we haven't spent a lot of time kind of dissecting and diving into what he's going to do because we don't really know. To me, that's going to be one of the most interesting things to hear Matt Rhule talk about when he meets with the media. And several players are going to be a part of this too next Tuesday at the Nebraska football complex as kind of a spring preview. What is Pat Stewart doing? What did Matt Rhule bring in Pat Stewart to do? I'm intrigued by that because I think it's more than what Nebraska. It's a different role than what Nebraska's been using the GM spot for with Sean Padden over the last 2 years.
Fascinating. I'll ask you this. Do you think Nebraska's, culture expectations are established enough to not be concerned about 10 new starters, 16 transfers, guys that are going to come in and make a big impact? Like and what we've heard so far on that front is, yeah, I think Matt Rhule gave that anecdote a couple weeks ago and about how a player came up to him and said, "Hey, you brought in the right guys." And that's like a great thing to hear, obviously, but man, they're going to be depending on Dane Key a lot. They're going to be depending on Elijah Pritchett and Jalen George and Dasan McCullough and
Rocco.
Rocco Spindler, man. Andrew Marshall. Like they're going to be depending on those guys a lot this year. So, I mean, those guys frankly have to hit. They have to be good players for Nebraska. And so oftentimes we talk about when transfers come in, there's this good long adjustment period. They got to speed up that process quite a bit.
What's going to happen is they're not all going to hit. Somebody's going to get hurt in the spring. Somebody's going to have, a unexpected, just doesn't mesh. Like we look back a year ago and see what Nebraska was expecting from its transfer portal class, and we'd have been talking about Micah Mazuka and how this is huge. They got to hit with this guy. And he played, and at times he was good, but I wouldn't say that he hit. Like it was a bit of a roller coaster ride with him. Bly Hill, we were talking in the spring. This guy's got to hit. Like they need this guy to be a lockdown corner, to be somebody they can stick in that lineup and not have to worry about. Or he got hurt in spring
It really hit.
practice. Like
Yep.
this stuff is going to happen. So as we sit here and we analyze, like this has got to go this way, it's not going to. Like you have to have. So that's where the returning players come in, because you have to have that built-in cushion. And this I think leads into a conversation I want to have in the next segment. But you need to have like the establishment has to be there. So when you talk about the players and like what's the key, it's probably the guys who are coming back. And if Nebraska's if it's a comfortable situation for Nebraska, if it can make say 10 new starters work, probably as big of a key as anything to whether that works is the kind of leadership that they have that's already on the roster. Like how can Dylan Raiola turn into a better leader? What do they have at the running back spot? What do they have coming back at the linebacker position in the secondary? Like all of those guys are going to be essential in allowing the new pieces to work the way that Nebraska needs them and envisions them all to work.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think it's not hard to identify those guys as you sort of go down the line. I mean, obviously Dylan Raiola is a huge part of it. Emmett Johnson comes back as the guy who's going to have most of the carries this year. You know, Ja'Cory Barney in the receiver room all of a sudden, you know, immediately steps into that with Dane Key, who's been around to kill shorts for a while. You know, Heinrich Harburg probably takes on a leadership role on the offensive side of the ball. You know, there's a lot of those guys.
I got a question to end this segment for you. So when Rhule goes in front of the media on Tuesday, Nebraska has said there that it's going to put 2 to 4 players out there to also kind of preview spring practice. Let's say it's 4. Who are the 4 that you're putting there?
I think Dylan Raiola is like an obvious one.
So 3 because you know that they're going to put the QB there,
right? Do you think any of them will be new transfers?
I think so. I mean, I think that you want to do that. I think like in the dichotomy of this team, like as you look at it, like the transfer piece is big. So I think they should. If they don't, I'm kind of going, all right, well, maybe it was just a decision to go with we're only going to have the veterans doing this. But I don't know. Last year when Nebraska had this kind of a situation, they had Jamal Banks go talk and you know, be a spokesperson for the team, and I think that was a good sign. So
Dane Key, Dane Key seems like an obvious guy that you'd put up there.
You know, Short said that he kind of is a leader by example type of receiver, where Banks was more, I'm going to tell you how to, I'm going to talk to you and tell you how to follow me. Like he was gifted in the ability to reach people that way. I think maybe Rocco would be the guy, because I think you have to do something with the offensive line. And, you know, they're not necessarily going to want to send players out to speak for the team who are injured and aren't going to be a part of spring practice. So I could see Rocco being some, you know, Emmett Johnson's is obviously a candidate on the offensive side too. But I wouldn't be shocked if we get a transfer, if it's the Notre Dame, the guard from Notre Dame.
Let me throw some more names at you defensively real quick before we get out of here. Marcus Buford, Sierra Wright, who kind of, you know, jumped into a big role last year. Deshaun Singleton, who's back for his 19th year of college football. Javen Wright, who's also back to for his 19th year of college football.
I think he's 20 years.
So those. I mean, you could elevate a guy like Shavers, you know, who's good for you last year. Maybe somebody from that defensive line. I don't know who it would be. Riley Van Poppel, maybe.
Yeah, Riley Van Poppel or Elijah Judy or Cam Lenhart. Those are the 3 that Braden's got to get better at deflecting the questions. So when he was asked, who are the leaders that you've seen in the defensive line room so far in your short time at Nebraska, he said, I don't want to say any names right now, but Elijah Judy, Riley Van Poppel, and Cam Lenhart are the guys that I'm looking at.
Okay.
So, all right. Thank you.
I think you answered your question. Thank you. All right. So we'll look forward to that, and we'll keep tabs on that one as we go forward. All right. We'll do a little whip around when we come back. Nebraska baseball got some bad news. Nebraska women's basketball has started their run in March, and maybe even a little Nebraska men's basketball as well. Back after this here on the Locked On Nebraska podcast.
All right, welcome back. Final segment of this Thursday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Mitch Sherman, Connor Happer. Get those mailbag questions in for Friday's show, last of the week. LockedOnNEB@gmail.com. You can reply in the YouTube comments or hit us on Twitter. Also, lots of ways to reach out. You guys make the content of the show on Friday, so look forward to hearing from everybody. Some big news, bad news, as Connor mentioned at the end of the last segment on Wednesday for Nebraska baseball. It's ace pitcher, junior right-hander Mason McConnaughey, out for the year with an arm injury suffered last week in his appearance against Sam Houston in Frisco, Texas. So McConnaughey came into this season as a Golden Spikes Award watch list member, the first for Nebraska to be on that preseason list since 2016. He was a preseason All-American, huge piece in what Nebraska had hoped to get done in the Big Ten this season. So you open Big Ten play.
Who would that have been? Who was on the list in 20? Do you know? Then was it?
I don't. Like, my memory is fuzzy as to like who would have been a great player for Nebraska in 2016.
Scott Schreiber. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Nebraska's had some players for sure who were worthy by the time the season got going of being a part of that. But yeah, I guess nobody had gotten the preseason hype in the last last 9 years.
Okay, hang on.
Bryce Matthews would have been a great addition to that list if it had been vetted properly, but he wasn't.
It was Ryan Bolt.
Okay,
all right. Ryan Bolt who made the list.
Infielder, was he a third baseman?
No, he was a center fielder. He was pretty. I mean, he had some injuries throughout his career, but yeah, definitely.
Max Anderson would have been a good guy to put on there. Of course, Nebraska's got a bunch of big leaguers. Who's the two-way player, the shortstop, who was a great pitcher for Nebraska in recent years?
Myers.
No, is with the Braves as a pitcher and was a great hitter at Nebraska. No.
Spencer Schwellenbach.
Yes. Are we playing like the $25,000 pyramid here? What's going on?
It's like, okay, I need one more descriptor. What was he again? All right, here we go. No, they've had some good players, no doubt. That stinks for Mason, who was, a really good guy in the Saturday role last year for Nebraska with Brett Sears going on Friday nights and being dominant, and they kind of elevated Mason into that, like, yeah, you're our stud, you're our Friday night guy. And so Nebraska's gonna have to piece that together a little bit. It moves everybody up a day, and we already talked about how little pitching they had for like midweek stuff last year, so it just kind of moves everybody up a category as well. I'm interested to see where it sort of lands for them on the pitching side, because it seems more complete this year. But you definitely don't have the big head of the snake at the top of the rotation right now.
Yeah. So I wanted to turn this into a conversation here over the last 5 minutes. By the way, good news. We'll get some good news here. And this is part of it too for the Nebraska women's basketball team, which won its 20th game of the season on Wednesday, 84-60 against Rutgers. Alexis Markowski had 19 and 10. Amy Williams' team will play Illinois today at 5:30 in Indianapolis. Winner gets to the quarterfinal in the massive mix of teams in the Big Ten. Nebraska would have to win 5 games to bring home a Big Ten tournament title. Not likely, but the Huskers are, am I right? They're safely in the NCAA tournament. 20 wins, they're getting in. Even though they had to play on day 1 in the conference tournament, they're going to be dancing. Impressive that this team is doing it without Allison Widener and Natalie Potts, who were 2 starting level players, starters, injured
absolutely
early in the season. When I heard about the McConnaughey news on Wednesday, I kind of had flashbacks to previous instances of recent bad news that we get for Nebraska. It seems to kind of happen fairly often, and you wonder, it's easy to wonder, like, why does this stuff why does this stuff happen in Nebraska every week? Why does Nebraska seem to be on the wrong side of these stories, whether it's football, basketball, like we saw on Tuesday night in Columbus, so regularly? Is this normal, do you feel, if you were instead living in Iowa City or East Lansing? Would you also feel as if, man, there's a lot of unfortunate things that happen to these teams in the change seasons within the athletic department that I'm following?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm trying to put myself in the in the shoes of a fan of a different program, and I'm thinking like, man, okay, what, have we undergone these crippling injuries? And to Nebraska's credit, and both of those teams, it doesn't look like they're going to be, like crippling, like season ruining injuries for them. They've kind of found ways to, especially with the women's basketball team, they've found ways to make it work. Still in 20 games is pretty impressive with what they've gone through this year, and leaning on a freshman really hard. I don't think it seems particularly abnormal to me.
Yeah.
But I can understand how it might feel that way when it just, it feels like there's a team a year or something like that. Nebraska men without Rink Bass the entire year. I think that's something that's popped up quite a bit over the last several weeks. Like, man, if we had that guy, maybe our season's a little bit different. So yeah, I think it's interesting.
I think if you're a fan, it's easy to feel that way. It's easy to feel like, gosh, why does this keep happening? But I think the reality is that if you're a program that kind of lives in the margins and needs to win in the margins, then you are going to be impacted more by this kind of stuff. And yes, you run the risk of feeling as if, man, bad stuff always happens to us, when I think bad, it's sports, and like negative turns happen for everyone. Ohio State football had some potentially devastating injury news, not just to one player, but multiple starters on the offensive line went down during the season. And because it's Ohio State football, and because it has the kind of, I talked a few minutes ago about what Nebraska football needs to make sure that it can handle something bad that's going to happen in the spring. It needs to have that reassurance, that depth in the players that are coming back. You have to have that foundation. That's what Ohio State football has. And that's hard to come by when you play in an 18-team Super League. Everything is competitive. Every recruit that you sign, every game, whether it's against the last place team in the league, is competitive. And the negative turns that occur, as big or small as they might be, they can have huge impacts. Like Nebraska has, I think, one program in its athletic department that doesn't seem to feel as if it gets dealt these kind of blows on a regular basis. Yes, as you bump, set, and spike there on the YouTube feed. It's Nebraska volleyball. And that's like the Ohio State football of Nebraska sports. And why is that? Because the foundation is rock solid.
Yeah, and their margin for error is like gigantic. They have the best talent in the country. I think that's absolutely the main part of this. When you become so hyper focused on, man, we got like two really good players, but we need those two really good players to be really, really good for us. All of a sudden, one of those people are gone, or whatever it might be. And so, yeah, but you have to do that. To your point, Mitch, in a league like this, you have to do that. I mean, you have to kind of base your team around, like, you have to base your team around that type of thing. So, I don't think it's, that abnormal, but it's a pretty good illustration of where Nebraska lives right now in the landscape.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll see how that plays out in the spring for Nebraska football, and hope that there are not any of those catastrophic moments that happen for Matt Rhule's team, and they can roll into the summer with everything on track. But I wouldn't bet on it. So thanks for making the Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On College Basketball Podcast with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. Don't wait for March Madness. Be the most informed college basketball fan right now. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.